Part 1, A Normal Beginning with Hidden Shadows. Gabrielle grew up in Temecula, California, a sunny town not far from San Diego. Her childhood was, by her own account, pretty average, nothing extravagant, nothing terrible. Her parents split when she was 6 or 7, but it wasn't a dramatic affair. They just weren't right for each other, and Gabrielle maintained good relationships with both. School was uneventful until high school, when things started to get a little wild, not at home, but in the chaos of friendships and teenage life. She attended private Christian and Catholic schools, which gave her a sheltered upbringing, but that bubble burst when she met a girl at 14 who would change her life. This girl, her new best friend, came from a troubled home. Her mother was a longtime meth addict, and their house was a wreck, no windows, no doors, just chaos. Gabrielle, naive and loyal, spent a lot of time there after school, waiting for her mom to pick her up. What started as a close friendship took a dark turn when the girl's mother got them both caught up in dangerous situations. For a brief period, they were exploited, a harrowing experience that left Gabrielle shaken. When her friend was expelled from school, they lost contact, and Gabrielle later heard she'd fallen into a rough life far away. The betrayal stung, but Gabrielle pushed through, finishing high school and trying to move on. After high school, college wasn't for her. Despite her dad's hopes for a degree, Gabrielle dropped out after 2 years to pursue her passion, tattooing. She was ready to carve her own path, but her past experiences lingered, making her wary of trust. Still, at 17, she was hopeful, a hopeless romantic dreaming of a high school sweetheart story. That's when she met Jesse, or so she thought his name was. Introduced through mutual friends, Jesse was older, 21 or 22, and seemed charming at first. They hit it off quickly, and within a month, they were dating. It was Gabrielle's first relationship, and she dove in headfirst, unaware of the red flags piling up, his age, his lack of a car or license, and the way he slowly inserted himself into her life. At first, things were smooth. Jesse came to her school plays, hung out with her friends, and seemed like a supportive boyfriend. But as the months passed, cracks started to show. About 6 months in, Jesse began sharing strange beliefs, delusions that he was both God and the devil, that he knew how the world would end, and that Gabrielle was some kind of mystical figure from another life. She didn't know what to make of it, but as a young woman in her first relationship, she didn't have a frame of reference for what was normal. She wanted to believe in him, to fix him, to make it work. Little did she know, these were just the early signs of a storm that would consume her life. Part 2, The Spiral of Delusion and Control. As Gabrielle and Jesse's relationship deepened, so did his troubling behavior. His delusions grew more intense, and he started to weave Gabrielle into them, claiming she was destined to play a role in his apocalyptic visions. He'd stare at cars on the road at 3 a.m., convinced they were following him because they knew who he was. Gabrielle, driving home from her photography gigs at music shows, would nod along, afraid to challenge him. She loved him, or thought she did, and watching someone she cared about unravel was heartbreaking. But love and fear began to blur. Jesse's presence in her life became suffocating. He moved into her mom's house in Marietta, not through a formal decision but by lingering longer and longer after weekend visits. Gabrielle would drive to pick him up from his mom's place, and soon, he was staying for weeks at a time. It wasn't healthy, but at 17, she didn't see the danger. Meanwhile, Jesse's behavior grew erratic. He started accusing her of infidelity, even when she was just doing her job or hanging out with friends. His paranoia extended to her photography work, where he'd tag along to gigs and later berate her, claiming she was being unfaithful. The accusations were relentless, and when confronted, he'd turn the tables, making Gabrielle feel like she was the one losing her mind. Then came the cheating. About a year in, Gabrielle discovered Jesse was unfaithful, through social media, emails, and even in person with other women. When she confronted him with evidence, he'd scream, cry, or threaten to harm himself, manipulating her into feeling guilty. She'd forgive him, justifying his actions because of his mental state. After all, he was diagnosed with severe paranoid schizophrenia, depression, and other issues after a hospital stay triggered by threats to harm himself, Gabrielle, and his family. The hospital put him on medication, and for a brief moment, he seemed stable. Gabrielle visited him, hoping he'd get better, but his family's indifference, they barely knew she existed, added another layer of betrayal. When Jesse was discharged, he returned to live with Gabrielle and her mom. She took on the role of caretaker, ensuring he took his meds, but it was a losing battle. One day, he stopped taking them cold turkey, and everything spiraled. His delusions intensified, his accusations grew wilder, and he became controlling, isolating Gabrielle from friends and family. The relationship, now nearing 2 years, was a maze of red flags she couldn't escape. She justified his behavior, blaming his illness, her youth, and her desire to fix him. But deep down, she was starting to realize that love shouldn't feel like this. Part 3, The Breaking Point. By the time Gabrielle was 18, her relationship with Jesse had become a nightmare. His untreated schizophrenia fueled paranoia and aggression, and he began crossing lines that shattered her sense of safety. He'd accuse her of cheating constantly, even when she was at her new job at Hot Topic, a seasonal gig she loved. Jesse would force her to drive him to work, where he'd lurk, watching her every move to ensure she wasn't talking to male coworkers. If she went alone, he'd claim she smelled like she'd been with someone else, a baseless accusation that left her humiliated and confused. The control was relentless, and Gabrielle felt trapped in her own life. The emotional abuse escalated, and Jesse's manipulations grew darker. He'd gaslight her, making her question her reality, and his cheating continued unabated. When confronted, he'd deflect with threats or emotional outbursts, leaving Gabrielle to pick up the pieces. She was isolated, her friends pushed away by Jesse's jealousy, and her mom, though supportive, couldn't fully grasp the extent of the danger. Gabrielle was drowning, but a glimmer of hope appeared when she met Mason, a coworker who became her best friend. Mason was everything Jesse wasn't: kind, funny, and grounded. They bonded over music and shared interests, and for the first time in years, Gabrielle felt seen. Mason, an outsider to her toxic relationship, started pointing out what she couldn't see: Jesse's behavior wasn't normal. He saw the screenshots of Jesse's abusive messages, heard about the accusations and control, and urged her to recognize the truth. One day, while grabbing coffee with Mason after work, Jesse texted her, claiming he knew she was cheating. He escalated, saying he'd stolen her mom's car and was watching them. Panicked, Gabrielle called her mom, who confirmed the car was still at home. It was a lie, but it was also a wake-up call. That moment flipped a switch. Gabrielle knew she had to leave, but it wouldn't be easy. Jesse lived with her, and his erratic behavior made her fear for her safety. With Mason's support, she began planning her escape in secret. She'd visit Mason's house under the guise of hanging out with a friend, slowly moving her belongings. She started detaching from Jesse, picking fights over text to create distance, but never in person. She was too afraid of what he might do. Her family embraced Mason, and he became a lifeline, helping her navigate the fear and guilt of leaving someone she once thought she loved. Part 4: Freedom and Lessons Learned. Gabrielle's breaking point came when she discovered Jesse cheating again, this time through his PlayStation. Something snapped. She grabbed the console, smashed it in her backyard, and packed his belongings into trash bags, leaving them on the driveway. She called his friend to pick him up. And just like that, he was gone. It wasn't easy. She was terrified, not just for herself but for her mom, who'd been dragged into this chaos. But it was done. Gabrielle changed her number, blocked him on social media, and tried to rebuild her life. 2 months later, Jesse reappeared, showing up at her mom's house dressed in a white button-down and slacks, claiming he needed a suit. His arms were bandaged from self-inflicted wounds, a desperate plea for sympathy. But Gabrielle was done. She handed him the suit, shut the door, and walked away. He continued to harass her through burner accounts, sending threats and insults, but she held firm. Eventually, she heard he'd moved to Nevada, still unaccountable for his actions, his family enabling his behavior. Gabrielle reached out to his uncle, hoping to warn others, but got no response. Jesse was someone else's problem now. The scars of that nearly 3-year relationship ran deep. At 17 to 19, Gabrielle had endured manipulation, control, and abuse, all under the guise of love. She learned hard lessons: to trust her instincts, to run at the first red flag, and to never justify someone's harmful behavior. For years, she struggled to trust anyone, even herself. The chaos of her past made healthy relationships feel foreign, and she found herself drawn to drama, mistaking it for normalcy. But by 22, she was in a calmer, healthier relationship, working to unlearn the patterns Jesse had ingrained. Gabrielle's story isn't just about survival, it's about resilience. She walked away from a nightmare, rebuilt her life, and pursued her dreams as a tattoo artist. Her first relationship wasn't the high school sweetheart story she'd hoped for, but it taught her strength, boundaries, and the power of saying enough. For anyone watching, her message is clear: you deserve better, and you have the strength to walk away. Red flags aren't challenges to fix, they're warnings to run.